Have you ever felt that no matter how much you evolve, something or someone always silently pulls you back to a place where your soul no longer belongs? You may have taken courses, changed habits, learned to silence your mind, and even started to align your vibration with what you want to manifest. But still, at some deep level, you feel a weight, an inexplicable tiredness, as if every time you get close to a new reality, something invisible holds your wings. And you go back. You go back to a smaller version of yourself. You go back to old conversations, old guilts, old affections, and almost always, you go back to the same people. Napoleon Hill once said, "The human mind is shaped by influence, not only by the information it absorbs, but mainly by the emotional field of those we choose to walk with." In Think and Grow Rich, he revealed one of the most uncomfortable secrets of success. You are inevitably affected by the 5 people you spend the most time with. 5. It seems like few, but all it takes is one misaligned presence, repeated every day, to slow down an entire spiritual journey. And here is the truth that almost no one dares to say. Most people do not fail for lack of talent, nor for laziness, nor for lack of effort. They fail because they are surrounded by the wrong energies, energies that are often disguised as love, friendship, companionship, but inside, they vibrate fear, scarcity, and conformity. Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote that self-confidence is the first secret of success. But how can you trust yourself when your intuition is drowned out by external voices? How can you believe in your own vision when every bold step is met with judgmental looks, irony, or uncomfortable silence? How can you grow in peace if, deep down, you fear disappointing those who love you? Or worse, fear being alone? This is what this video will guide you on. Calmly, with truth, with respect. Let's talk about a type of sabotage that doesn't scream, but that imprisons. A type of bond that disguises itself as loyalty, as family, as ties that you don't want to break. But that may already be preventing your soul from flourishing. You feel like you're trying, but something invisible is still pulling you down. And that something, in many cases, is people. People you love, people you admire, people who may applaud you, but unconsciously keep you in the same place. Here's the premise that may bother you, but also liberate you. Not everyone who loves you is aligned with your destiny, and many of those around you, without knowing it, limit you, demean you, pull you into a pattern of reality that no longer serves you. Staying connected to people who are not aligned with your purpose is a slow form of spiritual suicide, because every empty conversation, every shallow advice, every joke disguised as sincerity cuts off a piece of your vision. It misaligns your field, it confuses your frequency, and you start to doubt, not the other person, but yourself. Today, you will understand why you feel exhausted, even when you do everything right. You will realize how the environment around you shapes your energy without you even realizing it. And most importantly, you will learn how to free your consciousness from this invisible prison without having to cut, hurt, or reactively withdraw. You will learn to rise above. And as you rise above, you will see who can truly accompany you. Now that you have come this far, take a deep breath. Put your feet on the ground, because what comes next is not just an analysis of relationships. It is a mirror, a call, an awakening. What you are about to hear can change not only your perspective, but the energy you carry when you look in the mirror. Let's go together. The emotional cost of belonging to the wrong group. Have you ever stopped to feel the silent price you're paying to stay close to certain people? Not the financial price, not the time, but the vibrational cost. The cost of shaping your light so as not to overshadow anyone. The cost of diminishing yourself to fit into old bonds. The cost of smiling when something inside tells you that you no longer belong in that environment. Since the dawn of human existence, carrying the fear of rejection has been a matter of survival. Being expelled from the group in the savannah meant certain death. Today, that has changed, but our brain still holds the same ancestral pattern. It interprets social rejection as physical pain. Literally, Neuroscience studies show that the same areas activated by physical pain light up when we feel excluded, ignored, or criticized. That is why, even when you know that a cycle has ended, something in you hesitates. Something in you tries to remain kind, acceptable, pleasant. Even if, deep down, your soul screams for expansion, there are people in your life that you love, but who perhaps no longer support the energy of your new cycle. People who were important, but who are now emotional anchors. Not out of malice, but out of attachment, out of habit, out of fear, and out of a type of bond that feeds on your conformity, not your greatness. The pain of belonging to the wrong group is not dramatic. It is silent. It is that feeling of feeling alone even in company, of leaving social gatherings feeling empty, of not being able to share your true dreams because deep down you know that you will not be understood, or worse, you will be judged in silence. This is the emotional cost of staying out of loyalty and not alignment, of smiling to maintain bonds that no longer see you, of continuing to be with those who do not celebrate your evolution but feel threatened by it, of listening to advice from those who have never dared to take a step outside their comfort zone. The mind, when exposed to misaligned environments, begins to adapt. It begins to numb itself. It begins to create excuses to justify staying. But the body feels it. The intuition feels it. The soul feels it. And there comes a time when the internal tension becomes unbearable, not because the other person is bad, but because you can no longer ignore your truth. Maybe you don't need more willpower. Maybe you just need to get away from the force that is draining your will. Because sometimes it's not you who is failing. It's the environment that is pulling you back to an old version of yourself, a version that no longer exists. You are not wrong for wanting to grow. You are not ungrateful for realizing that certain connections need to be revised. You are simply waking up. And waking up is lonely, yes, but it is also liberating. Because once you see the emotional cost of belonging to the wrong group, it becomes impossible to continue paying that price in silence. Collective vibrational frequency. When the environment vibrates in scarcity, there is an almost invisible pain that creeps in when you begin to awaken to abundance, but you are still surrounded by minds that vibrate in scarcity. Not a scarcity of money, but a scarcity of vision, of faith, of courage to imagine something beyond what has already been experienced. It is a dense field, almost imperceptible, but real. A field that surrounds you, influences you, and little by little, alters your own vibration without you realizing it. The human being is not just an individual. He is part of a collective energy field. Joe Dispenza reminds us that our electromagnetic field is in constant interaction with everything around us. This means that you are not just hearing words, you are absorbing frequencies. When you live with people who complain all the time, who see problems in everything, who disbelieve in the invisible, your mind begins to adapt to survive in that environment. And often this adaptation is a disconnection from yourself. You start to hesitate before talking about your dreams. You start to hide your spiritual practices, your intuitions, your desires for expansion. You start to mold yourself so as not to seem arrogant, naive, strange. And in this effort to belong, you start to lose yourself. Scarcity is not just a lack of resources. It is a frequency, a vibration of fear, control, attachment. When it dominates the environment, it reprograms the emotional biology of the group. And you, even without wanting to, start to vibrate with less confidence, less presence, less deservingness. Your mind becomes more reactive, your body more tense, your thoughts more defensive. This environment of scarcity does not attack you directly. It does not shout. It does not tell you to stop, but it mocks, discredits, relativizes. It transforms your enthusiasm into exaggeration, your hope into illusion, your faith into childishness. And little by little, you stop believing in yourself. You stop investing energy in your projects. You stop dreaming of freedom and silently accept the vibrational pattern of the group. You were not born for this. Your spirit knows this, but your mind may be conditioned. So observe, not just what people say around you, but what you feel when you are with these people. Observe how your body responds, how your intuition is silenced, how your heart closes. Sometimes it is not life that is difficult. It is the environment that is heavy. It is the collective field that is malnourished with vision, presence, truth. You have the right to choose the vibrational field in which you want to live. Because living in an environment of scarcity day after day is not only stagnant, it is corrosive. In the long run, this does not only affect your results, it affects your identity, your energy, your soul. And no soul flourishes where everything vibrates with fear. The hidden fear of outgrowing the one you love. There is a kind of pain that few can name, but that paralyzes entire souls. It is the silent guilt that arises when you begin to prosper, but feel that as you grow, you might leave someone behind. It is not about arrogance. It is not about ego. It is about the ancestral fear that by shining too brightly, you will no longer belong to the group you have learned to call home. Maybe you have been taught that humility is synonymous with invisibility, that to love is to never surpass, that to grow too much is to become distant. And deep down, a voice whispers, "If I prosper too much, I will be alone." This belief is sneaky. It does not appear in your most rational thoughts, but hides in the small procrastinations, in the self-sabotage, in the projects that you start with enthusiasm and then abandon without understanding why, in the invitations that you decline for no apparent reason, in the opportunities that you let slip by. It's as if there's an invisible limit to your expansion, an emotional ceiling built not by your limitations, but by the fear of breaking away from the collective identity of the group. This group could be your family, your childhood friends, your community, your partner, people you love, who have supported you, who have been there for you in difficult times, but who may not be ready to see who you are becoming. And this is one of the deepest spiritual conflicts. How to follow your soul's calling without seeming like a betrayal of the bonds that have sustained you thus far. How to be true to your truth without seeming disloyal to your origins. The fear of outgrowing the person you love is often a reflection of your compassion. You don't want to hurt. You don't want to appear better. You don't want to leave anyone behind. But there's something important to understand. You don't grow against anyone. You grow for life, for your mission, for your authenticity. And in fact, it's your courage to expand that may one day inspire others to do the same. Yes, some people may not understand. You may miss some connections. Perhaps the silence of those who no longer recognize you hurts for a while. But remaining small for fear of bothering others is a very high price to pay. Because those who commit to their own evolution, even in the midst of guilt, build a new path for all those who come after. You are not here to repeat stories. You are here to transcend patterns. And sometimes, to truly love is to free yourself. To free yourself. To free the other, to free your own conscience from the obligation to remain where there is no longer any truth. Because if your growth is sincere, it will never exclude love, but it will include a new type of love, a love that does not limit, that does not demand regression, that does not impose sacrifice, but that welcomes the freedom of each soul to follow its own time, the silent veneration of those who have never accomplished anything. There is a subtle form of emotional imprisonment that few realize, but that keeps thousands of people stuck in the same place. It is the silent authority you give to those who have never dared to do what you are trying to do, those who have never taken risks, who have never gotten up after a fall, who have never walked on their own into the unknown. And yet, they are the voices you are most afraid to contradict. Maybe it is a loving father who has lived his entire life in fear, a devoted mother who has always believed that money is hard to come by, a close friend who has never left his own neighborhood, a partner who prefers the comfort zone to the uncertainty of the new. These people may love you deeply, but that does not make them qualified to give an opinion on the life you want to build. And the most painful thing is that in many cases, you do not hear these people just by their words. You hear them by their looks, by their expression of doubt, by their camouflaged irony, for the disconcerting silence when you share a dream, for the lack of enthusiasm when you take an important step. And then, Without realizing it, you slow down, you question, you reconsider, and you go back into the emotional cave of acceptance. Giving too much weight to the opinions of those who have never tried is a spiritual self-deception. It is a way of keeping yourself safe, because following their logic means remaining within a predictable world. But the predictable is often the prison of the soul, and blindly trusting the emotional authority of those who have not dared to dream is a sure path to stagnation. The human mind tends to confuse affection with wisdom, and just because someone loves you does not mean they understand what is best for you. Love is not synonymous with vision, and emotional loyalty cannot override your inner truth, because those who have never left the ground cannot teach you how to fly. Those who have never broken their own limits cannot guide you on expansion. Those who have never faced their own fears do not have the language to decipher yours. Silent veneration is dangerous because it is not questioned. It establishes itself as a nonverbal rule, a code of conduct, a respect that turns into submission. But the soul did not come into the world to follow other people's scripts. It came to create a new map. And this map can only be drawn when you start asking yourself, why do I keep listening to voices that have never walked the path my heart desires to follow? You don't have to disrespect anyone to stop obeying. You don't have to confront anyone to free yourself. But you do need to, with compassionate firmness, recognize who is truly prepared to guide you, and who, without realizing it, is just repeating the limits they inherited. Because if you keep giving the microphone of your life to those who have never had the courage to use their own voice, you will spend an entire existence trying to please spectators who have never taken the stage. The emotional mirror effect, how limited people keep you small. There is an almost invisible but extremely powerful dynamic that occurs between souls who relate to each other without vibrational awareness. It is the emotional reflection, the silent mirror that forms when two people, even unconsciously, begin to regulate each other's brightness. And this mirror does not show who you are. It shows who the other person can bear you to be. When you live with emotionally limited people, and here we're not talking about judgment, but about vibration, something subtle begins to happen. Your expansion becomes a threat. Your boldness, exaggeration, your faith, naivety, your vision of the future, an exaggeration disconnected from reality. And then the game begins. The silent game of bringing you back to the same level. This leveling is not always direct. It does not come in the form of confrontations, shouting, or prohibitions. It comes in smiles, disguised as doubt, in jokes that diminish your plans, in advice that pulls you into fear, in comments like, "You've changed. It's not quite like that. Don't go so fast." Small, subtle blows to your emotional field that, when added together, build an invisible prison. Many of these people believe they are taking care of you. They believe they are being realistic, protective, rational, and maybe they are, but they are, mainly, protecting their own inner world from being challenged. Because when they see you expanding, they need to confront what they didn't do, what they left for later, what they abandoned in themselves. Your light touches the shadow they avoid. Your freedom confronts the prison they accepted. And it is easier to diminish you than to review your own history. The emotional mirror effect is not evil, it is a defense. But if you are not awake, you will start to mold yourself to continue being accepted. You will reduce your dreams. You will talk less about what you love. You will doubt your worthiness. You will lower the tone of your vibration so that the other person does not feel uncomfortable. And before you know it, you'll be living a life that pleases others, but makes your soul sick. You don't have to choose between being loved and being true. But you need to understand that some people only know how to love their limited version because it's the only one they can keep up with. And that's okay. That doesn't make them any less worthy of affection. But it forces you to decide, who do you want to be when no one else is limiting your flight? There are bonds that are safe, but not fertile. They are comfortable, but not evolutionary. They are affectionate, but not true. Because truth only exists when you can be whole. And wholeness requires courage. The courage to see that Sometimes the one you love most is also the one who fears your awakening the most. And for love, you need to learn not to diminish yourself, because your brilliance is not an affront. It's a sign that the soul is alive, and living souls don't fit into old molds. They expand, even if it displeases, even if it causes distance, even if it requires silence. And it is in this silence that you learn that growing up truly is an act of self-love, and also an invitation for others to do the same, if they want to, if they can, if they are ready, but no longer at the expense of your light. The invisible loyalty, commitment to an identity that has already died. Sometimes what keeps you stuck is not the fear of failure. It is the silent loyalty to a version of yourself that no longer exists. An identity built years, perhaps decades ago, based on the needs, traumas, pains, and emotional references of a time that has passed. But this identity, however worn out it may be, still holds its ground. It still demands its permanence. It still demands loyalty. It is a loyalty that does not shout. It whispers. It says things like, "I can't change that much. It wouldn't be fair to those who helped me. Who do I think I am to want more?" And suddenly, you are living a life that honors your past but denies your present. You struggle to maintain coherence with old choices, with old roles, with connections that made sense when you were someone who no longer exists. This invisible loyalty is described by psychogenealogy as an unconscious fidelity to family and ancestral ties. It's the fear of betraying your origins, of growing too much and, in doing so, appearing to reject your roots. And so you repeat patterns, you reproduce behaviors, you take on emotional roles that were assigned to you before you were even aware of what you wanted for yourself. You become the strong one in the family, the one who can't make mistakes, the one who needs to get it right, or on the contrary, the one who always needs help, the one who can't do it alone, the one who was never good at it. And these stories become your emotional prison, because every time you try to go off script, something pulls you back. Not violently, but with guilt, with fear, with the feeling that you are abandoning something sacred. But there is no abandonment when there is awareness. Growing up is not betraying. Evolving is not disrespecting. Releasing yourself from a role that no longer serves you is not ingratitude. It is spiritual honesty. Because no one came into the world to repeat old scripts. Each soul carries within itself the mission of updating the legacy it received. And that requires courage. The courage to look at your own story and say, "I honor what I lived, but I am no longer that version." The identity you have built up until now was necessary. It protected you. It helped you survive. But the time has come when it no longer serves you. And remaining faithful to something that has already died is to imprison yourself for fear of being free, because freedom demands new choices, and every new choice threatens the stability of old stories. You can deeply love the people who shaped you. You can be grateful for everything you have received. You can continue to honor your origins, but this does not require remaining in an outdated identity, because true love does not require sacrifice of the soul. And loyalty, when it becomes a prison, ceases to be a virtue. Maybe you are ready to let go, but you are still waiting for external permission. It will not come, because the only one who can authorize your freedom is you. And this moment, the moment when you choose your truth over repetition, can be the beginning of everything your soul has always known it deserved to experience. The trauma of approval, when rejection shapes your present. From a very young age, we learn to seek approval as if it were a form of emotional survival, a look of acceptance, a gesture of validation, a compliment that confirms you're on the right path. But when this search becomes a silent pattern, something breaks inside, because you stop living for yourself and start living to please, avoid conflict, and stay included. The trauma of approval arises in subtle places. Sometimes, it was the father who only praised you when you obeyed, the mother who showed affection only when you met expectations, the school that rewarded the well-behaved student but silenced creativity, the church that taught you that wanting more was a sin. And the world, with its unspoken rules, shaped your mind to associate love with conformity. And now, as an adult, every time you try to do something different, bold, free, the memory of rejection returns. Not in the form of a memory, but in the form of a break, of hesitation, of self-censorship. You start to wonder if you're going too far, if you are being too much, if you are running the risk of being rejected. And this risk, for those who have experienced the trauma of approval, seems like an emotional sentence. Then the mind adapts. It starts to seek acceptance strategies. You mold yourself to the environment. You hide your deepest ideas. You minimize your achievements so as not to appear superior. You diminish your truth so as not to cause discomfort. And little by little, you start to erase yourself. Until one day, without realizing it, you realize that you are living a life that does not have your signature. Excessive approval blocks boldness, because those who need to be loved all the time cannot challenge the standard. And all evolution requires rupture. It requires saying no. It requires displeasing. It requires running the risk of losing the approval of those who only recognize you when you remain small. You are not wrong for wanting to be accepted, but you need to understand that true acceptance never requires you to betray yourself. It respects your expansion. It embraces your difference. It celebrates your authenticity. And if that's not present in the relationships you have, maybe it's not love. Maybe it's just an emotional contract based on silent obedience. The trauma of approval is subtle because it feels like love. It feels like care. It feels like wisdom. But it's a prison disguised as kindness. Because every time you prioritize being accepted over being true, you're reaffirming to your unconscious that your essence isn't enough. But it is. It always has been. And maybe what's hurting you right now isn't external rejection, but self-rejection. Rejection of your own greatness. Refusal to allow yourself to be whole. And that refusal isn't your fault. It's just a reflection of everything you've had to do to continue being loved. But now you can choose differently. You can start healing that trauma, no longer by seeking approval, but by approving yourself. No longer by waiting for permission, but by allowing yourself. And this movement, although simple, has the power to transform the present you live and the future you attract. Relationships that reward your mediocre self. Not all bonds that offer affection offer growth. There are relationships that only flourish while you remain smaller than you really are. They applaud you when you limit yourself. They make themselves available when you are lost, confused, discouraged, but they disappear or distance themselves when you begin to align with your inner power, because the bond was never built on expansion, but on neediness. There are social circles that silently feed on your doubt, that feel more comfortable when you need advice, when you are vulnerable, when you need to be saved, because in that place, the other person feels needed, feels strong, feels useful. But when you begin to light up from within, to empower yourself, to no longer need the emotional crutches that supported the relationship, something changes. The tone changes, the energy changes, and often, the bond begins to crumble. These relationships are not just toxic in the classic sense, they are insidious. These are the bonds that reward you, not with true affection, but with conditional acceptance. As long as you are accessible, dependent, questioning your own greatness, you will be welcome. But if you start to truly love yourself, to put yourself first, to chart paths that defy the group standards, you will begin to notice a distance, a coldness, a veiled judgment. The hardest part is that many times these people are part of your closest circle. They are old colleagues, close relatives, longtime friends, people who, apparently, have always been by your side. But what was there was a connection with your wounded version, not with your awakened essence. The true spiritual test is not resisting loneliness. It is staying whole even when old bonds try to pull you back to a place where you no longer fit. It is recognizing that being loved by your limited version is not love. It is control. It is attachment. It is mutual neediness disguised as loyalty. And here is the hard truth to accept. When you start to heal, you threaten the dynamics of many relationships. because your healing confronts the stagnation of others. Your freedom confronts conformity. Your authenticity shows how many have settled into roles that are no longer true. And not everyone is ready for this reflection. You don't need to fight, or explain yourself, or try to convince. Just keep going, keep being you, keep growing, keep getting closer to your best frequency. Because the bonds that truly sustain your evolution will not only resist this transformation, they will flourish with it. And those who walk away, so be it. Not every presence that comforts you does you good. Sometimes, the greatest act of self-love is to step out of the circle that celebrates you only when you are small. Because your soul did not come to fit in, it came to expand. And expansion does not require permission, it requires courage. The illusion of the true friend. How emotional loyalty sabotages your expansion. It's common to hear that a true friend is someone who is with you at all times, who supports your choices, who knows you deeply. But there's a detail that's rarely discussed. Many bonds that we call friendship are, in fact, emotional ties established in old versions of ourselves. And when we start to transform, these bonds come into conflict with the new frequency that we're starting to vibrate at. There's a romanticized idea that true friendship is synonymous with permanence, with time, with accumulated intimacy. But what happens when this permanence requires you to stay the same? When this intimacy becomes a prison? When the other person can only love you in the version of you that was dependent, confused, submissive, or limited? Many times the person who says they love you is also the one who, unconsciously, holds you back, not out of malice, but because your growth changes the dynamics of the relationship. It demands new conversations, new truths, new silences, and not everyone is willing to evolve with you. They prefer you to remain predictable, familiar, accessible in a place that no longer resonates with your soul. And then the confusion arises. Am I being ungrateful for moving away? Am I changing too much? Is the problem me? But perhaps the real question is this friendship nourishing me or just keeping me stuck in an identity that no longer represents me? Emotional loyalty is beautiful when it is mutual, conscious, and liberating. But when it becomes silent demand, vibrational attachment, and dependence disguised as care, it becomes an obstacle to your expansion. Because to grow, you need space. And not every friendship is willing to give you that space. Some want to keep you exactly where you've always been, because that's where the other feels safe. You start to notice this in the small reactions, in how your victories are received coldly, in how your decisions are questioned subtly, in how your new values are seen as exaggerations. The energy changes, the conversation changes, the frequency is out of sync, and everything starts to ask for a silent review. This does not mean that there was no love, that there was no history, that there was no truth. It just means that not every story needs to go on forever. Some fulfill their role and end, and recognizing this end is also an act of respect. To yourself, to the other, and to the cycle that has been completed. A true friend is not the one who demands your stay. It is the one who celebrates your expansion. It is the one who is not offended by your transformation. It is the one who accompanies your journey, even from a distance, with an open heart. And if this is not the case, perhaps the bond that seemed like love was, in fact, vibrational familiarity. And familiarity, however comfortable it may seem, is not always synonymous with truth. You do not need to break up, or run away, or confront, but you can, with spiritual maturity, recognize where your loyalty is serving the past, and not your awakening, because loving is not nullifying yourself, and growing is not betraying anyone. It is simply allowing your soul to breathe new air, even if it means leaving behind some familiar voices. The invisible error of repeating relationship patterns. Have you ever wondered why you keep attracting the same types of people, the same conflicts, the same endings, even after so much internal effort? Why do certain relationships seem like a disguised repetition of the previous one? The answer lies not only in conscious choices, but in emotional patterns deeply rooted in your subconscious. Patterns that have been learned, absorbed, repeated over the years, and that now silently shape your connection frequency. Since childhood, your nervous system has learned to identify what is safe. But safety, for the brain, does not mean happiness. It means familiarity. And what is familiar, even if painful, becomes the reference of belonging. If you grew up in an environment where affection came along with control, absence, or criticism, it is likely that you still associate love with these elements. Not by rational choice, but because this is what your body recognizes as normal. These patterns create a specific vibrational field, a field that attracts, almost magnetically, people who reflect the same emotional codes. And so, even when you want something new, what appears is a disguised version of the old. The face changes, the name changes, but the frequency is the same, and the cycle begins again. Repeating relationship patterns is not a moral failure. It is a sign that something inside you is still seeking to complete an unfinished script. A part of you still wants to resolve what was hurt. You still want to finally be seen, to finally be loved like you never were. And so you unconsciously choose people who represent the past in the hope that this time, the outcome will be different. But the outcome does not change until the frequency changes. As long as pain is the compass, the route will lead to the same ports. And this cannot be cured with promises or affirmations. It is cured with presence, with self-observation, with the courage to say no even when need screams yes, with the silence that precedes a new choice. The invisible error is not loving too much. It is loving without realizing it, without asking yourself, why does this connection seem so familiar to me? What part of me is being fed here? What wound is being confirmed or numbed in this encounter? Because only when you start to hear these answers do you also start to free yourself from the cycle. And freeing yourself does not mean not loving anyone anymore. It means learning to recognize what true love is and what is just an emotional echo of an unresolved past. It means choosing relationships that nourish your presence, not reinforce your absences. It means allowing your inner story to be updated so that you stop being attracted to mirrors of what no longer serves you. You are not condemned to repeat yourself. You are being invited to awaken. And this awakening begins with a decision to see yourself so clearly that no emotional illusion can hide behind the word love. Because when you see yourself whole, everything that vibrates halfway no longer has a place. The silent will to be accepted versus the call of higher consciousness. There is within every human being an invisible but constant tension between two impulses that often clash. On one side, the silent will to be accepted, to belong, to be validated, welcomed, recognized as part of something. And on the other, an almost mystical call, subtle but undeniable, the call of higher consciousness. That inner invitation that asks for more truth, more freedom, more connection with the essence, and less obedience to what is comfortable or expected. This conflict is not superficial. It happens deep within. You feel it when you're in an environment and realize that you need to hide parts of yourself in order to continue being loved. When you need to silence your beliefs, your intuitions, your authenticity in order to maintain peace. And although everything seems harmonious on the outside, something inside you begins to wither, because peace built on the denial of the soul is not peace. It is adaptation. The will to be accepted is not a defect. It is born from the human need for connection, for affection, for belonging. But when this desire becomes stronger than the inner call, something breaks. You start to live in fear. Fear of being misunderstood, of being rejected, of being called strange, arrogant, or insensitive. And then you mold yourself. You start to fit in. You start to fit into spaces that your soul has already outgrown. But the call of higher consciousness does not disappear. It insists. It returns in the silences, in the discomforts, in the conversations in which you feel like you are being only a fraction of yourself. It returns in the loneliness that hits even when you are surrounded by people. It returns in that inexplicable tiredness after encounters that should be light, because you know Something inside you already knows, and knowing hurts more than ignoring. Living a life that others do not understand requires a rare spiritual strength. It requires the courage to disappoint expectations, to not be what they expect, to not repeat familiar patterns, to not follow collective scripts. And it requires, above all, a deep intimacy with your own truth. Because when you begin to align with your higher consciousness, there will not always be applause. There will often be silence, doubt, distance, and all of this can hurt. But it hurts more to remain. It hurts more to keep quiet. It hurts more to continue exchanging your own authenticity for an approval that only exists as long as you remain small. Because there is a price to be accepted, and there is a price to be free, and you have to choose which one you are willing to pay. Higher consciousness does not demand perfection. It demands presence. It demands choice. It demands a commitment to what you feel when you are alone with your soul. And when that commitment is honored, the peace that is born does not depend on applause. It sustains itself because it comes from within, because it comes from truth, because it comes from the place where the soul can finally breathe. When your silence is the only language the other understands. There are times when no explanation will be enough. No attempt to justify your transformation will be understood. No conversation, however sincere, will reach the place where the other has closed themselves off. And it is in these moments that silence becomes not an escape, but a form of respect. A silent language that says, I choose to walk away so as not to hurt. I choose to be silent so as not to lose myself. I choose to preserve my energy where there is no longer any listening. It is natural to want to be understood, to want the other to see your truth, to want to be recognized for who you are becoming. But this will not always be possible. There are consciousnesses that are not yet ready to see beyond the known forms. And the more you try to explain yourself, the more exhausted you become, the more entangled you become, the further you distance yourself from yourself. Silence, in this context, is not contempt. It is wisdom. It is the choice not to enter into disputes that would only fuel resentment. It is the decision not to participate in conversations where your soul would need to fragment in order to be accepted. It is the mature gesture of someone who understands that presence is not mandatory, that not every bond needs to continue to be nurtured, that love can also be expressed from a distance. Vibrational communication happens before words. You vibrate before you speak. You transmit before you explain. And often, what the other person feels by your side is not what you say, but what you have become. And if this new vibration is uncomfortable for them, no words will alleviate that impact. Because the discomfort is not personal, it is energetic. It is the natural reaction of a system that feels challenged by something it does not understand. And that is when you learn the power of silence. The silence that protects, the silence that honors, the silence that does not impose, but also does not submit, the silence that does not judge, but also does not cancel itself out, the silence that knows that the language of the soul is too subtle to be translated into justifications. There are cycles that end not with fights, but with absences. There are bonds that are transformed not by dialogue, but by distance. And there are times when the most compassionate thing you can do for yourself and for others is to simply stop trying to be understood. Because deep understanding does not happen through the mind, it happens through vibration. And when the time is right, if it is right, the other person will feel it. Without words, without explanations, without effort. Until then, allow yourself the silence that heals, that protects, that respects the unique journey of each soul, the invisible weight of unspoken expectations. There are burdens that you carry, and you don't even know where they came from. Roles that you assumed without realizing it. Promises that were never made out loud, but that hang in the air like silent obligations. You wake up every day feeling a weight that has no name, a tiredness that doesn't come from the body, but from the soul. And when you start to investigate the origin of this exhaustion, you discover that you are trying to fulfill expectations that were never spoken, but that you absorbed as a duty. These are the emotional projects of others, the dreams that they didn't realize and placed in you. the idealizations that they built around you and that now imprison you, the image of who you should be, the role of always being available, of not disappointing, of being strong, sensible, balanced, the role of caring, of giving in, of staying, even when something inside you is already begging for change. These unspoken expectations don't just come from outside. Over time, they infiltrate your identity. You start to believe that you need to respond in order to deserve love, that you need to meet the silent demands in order to feel like you belong. And without realizing it, you start to move away from your own truth in order to support the other person's emotional comfort zone. You say yes when you want to say no. You cancel yourself out in small decisions. You adapt before you're even asked to. And the worst part, you feel guilty when you think about breaking these patterns. Guilt for imagining that you could live a lighter, freer, more authentic life. But guilt in this case is not a sign of error. It is a sign of conditioning. It is the reflection of an emotional structure where your value was conditioned on how much you met the other person's needs. And breaking away from this requires more than courage. It requires awareness. It requires recognizing that true love does not demand fidelity to roles that hurt your essence, that no one is disappointed in you for being true. They are disappointed because they expected you to continue lying to yourself. And here is one of the most liberating lessons. You did not come into this world to support anyone's unconscious projects. You are not responsible for carrying pain that is not yours. You do not need to continue playing roles that your soul did not choose, because every role that requires you to abandon your truth, no matter how well-intentioned it may seem, is a role that sabotages your freedom. Freeing yourself from these expectations is not an act of selfishness. It is a profound gesture of self-love. And paradoxically, it is also a gesture of love for others, because only when you free yourself do you allow others to reconnect with their own truth. The weight falls away, the cycle is broken, and life can finally breathe new meaning, frequency, misalignment, how love can contain scarcity. Not all love is light, not all affection is healing. Not all relationships, no matter how sincere they may seem, are vibrationally healthy. There are bonds that seem like love, but are permeated by fear, attachment, control, emotional scarcity disguised as care. And the hardest thing to accept is that these connections can come from people you truly love. Frequency misalignment does not mean an absence of affection. It means that despite the affection, souls are not vibrating in the same direction. And when this happens, even the most loving gestures become burdens, because what is offered comes from a place of lack, of insecurity, of need, of emotional dependence. And when love is mixed with these energies, it suffocates more than it welcomes. There are relationships that are built not on expansion, but on compensation. One takes care of the other, not because both are full, but because both are trying to fill voids. One gives too much. The other demands too much. One cancels out, the other supports. And the cycle repeats itself. No one is the villain, no one is the victim, but both remain trapped in a dance where no one truly grows. When you begin to awaken spiritually, you also begin to realize that some of these relationships, although intense, do not sustain your highest frequency. You try to talk, but feel that no one is listening. You try to share your discoveries, but realize that the other person cannot keep up. And then the dilemma arises: to break up or stay, to cut off or insist, to love or to let go. But this choice does not need to be abrupt. It needs to be conscious. Loving someone does not mean carrying that person. It does not mean staying where your soul no longer fits. True love does not require sacrificing your essence. It respects cycles. It understands that individual growth sometimes requires distancing. Sometimes it requires silence. Sometimes it requires saying goodbye, even with a heavy heart. You are not wrong for feeling that a love is weighing more than it is elevating. This does not nullify the beauty of what was experienced. It doesn't erase the real moments, but it confirms that the time has come to ask, is this bond expanding or contracting me? Is it freeing me or holding me back? Is it vibrating with trust or fear? Love with scarcity vibrates with demand. Love with presence vibrates with freedom. And if you no longer feel lightness around the person you're with, maybe it's because your frequency has changed and the other person's hasn't. And that's okay. Awakening doesn't require perfection, but it does require choice. And sometimes, choosing yourself is the most loving gesture you can offer to another. Because when love frees, it heals. When it imprisons, it makes you sick, even if it's love. When pity traps you, the myth of not abandoning those in need. Compassion is one of the highest expressions of the spirit, the genuine desire to be with those who suffer, to support those in pain, to not leave behind those in need. But there is a subtle point where compassion becomes a prison, where love becomes self-abandonment. And that point is when you begin to nullify yourself, so as not to leave anyone behind. Many people carry this myth silently. The idea that walking away is selfish, that saying no is cruel, that growing too much, too fast, is a kind of betrayal to those who have not yet managed to walk. And so you remain, delaying your steps to wait, repressing your truth so as not to hurt, diluting your light so as not to disturb. But pity, when not accompanied by discernment, becomes a vibrational prison, because you not only connect with the pain of others, you become part of the field of scarcity where they live. You try to help, but you feel drained. You try to motivate, but you realize you're being dragged along. And deep down, something inside you knows you're being sucked in more than you're inspiring. There's a difference between supporting and dissolving, between reaching out and throwing yourself into the same hole. Helping isn't about sacrificing yourself until you disappear. And staying by someone's side who refuses to evolve isn't a virtue. It's attachment disguised as kindness. You can love without burdening. You can support without imprisoning yourself. You can feel compassion without taking on a role that isn't yours. Because often, what the other person needs most is not someone to save them, but someone who shows them, with their own life, that it's possible to choose differently, that it's possible to wake up, that it's possible to change. But that only happens when you take a stand, when you make it clear in your vibration and presence that your path is different, that your soul is asking for something more than the other person can currently follow. And that's okay. Everyone has their own time. But this time cannot cost you your life. Not abandoning those in need cannot mean abandoning yourself, because there is a limit where caring becomes self-cancellation. And in that place, pity does not liberate. It imprisons. It does not heal. It feeds the pain. It does not connect. It enslaves. Freeing yourself from the myth that you must always be there, always help, always support, is one of the greatest acts of spiritual maturity. You did not come to save anyone. You came to awaken, and your awakening, in itself, is already an offer of healing. But it only happens when you choose not to get lost trying to carry those who have not yet decided to walk. How your environment shapes your beliefs without you realizing it. You don't just believe what you choose to believe. Most of your deepest beliefs were not learned through logic or reflection, but rather absorbed by the environment in which you grew up, lived, and still live. They are emotional truths that entered you through repetition, through social interactions, through looks, through phrases said unintentionally but frequently, and over time, they became internal structures that now shape what you consider possible, right, desirable, or acceptable. The human brain is plastic. It adapts, and this neuroplasticity does not only occur with intense experiences, but with small, repeated stimuli, words you heard in childhood, emotional reactions you witnessed in adolescence, ideas that were normalized around you. All of this formed your field of beliefs. And today, even if you want to change, you still carry this content vibrating within you. You may want to prosper, but if you were taught, even indirectly, that money is scarce, dirty, or dangerous, you will feel guilty or afraid when you approach abundance. You may desire a conscious relationship, but if you have lived with emotional patterns based on control or need, you will tend to repeat these models even though you know they do not serve you. You may dream big, but if you grew up hearing that dreaming too much was foolish, you will unconsciously sabotage your own plans. It is not a lack of willpower. It is a question of frequency. Your vibration is still in tune with the field of the environment that formed you. And this field, even if invisible, still dictates the pace of your expansion. This is why changing with words alone is so difficult, because while you affirm something new, your body still vibrates in the old. While you repeat positive affirmations, your energy still resonates with ancestral fear, with the family pattern, with the collective narrative of the group to which you belong. The environment speaks, even in silence. It educates you without lessons. It molds you effortlessly. It limits you without saying no, because what you see, hear, and feel every day gradually becomes your norm. And if this norm is misaligned with your purpose, it will be an invisible but powerful obstacle. The good news is that this can also be reversed. When you start exposing yourself continuously to new vibrational environments, new ideas, new conversations, new presences, your internal field also begins to reorganize itself. The new frequency will gradually undo the old knots. It will dissolve beliefs that are not yours. It will allow you to feel that there are other possibilities, that you don't need to repeat yourself, that you can rewrite. But to do this, you need courage. Courage to leave your emotional comfort zone. Courage to question what has always been taken for granted. Courage to stop belonging to a place that no longer resonates with your soul. Because only then, by changing the field, can you change the content. And only then, by changing the content, can you begin to believe in something new. Not as an idea, but as a vibration that finally becomes your truth. An invisible army called poorly chosen counselors. There is a silent force shaping your decisions, even when you believe you are acting on your own. A subtle influence that does not impose itself, but guides. That does not shout, but guides. It is the field formed by the voices you choose to listen to, by the opinions you consider, by the people whose advice you carry as if they were absolute truths. And many of these voices, no matter how close they are, do not have the necessary alignment to guide the life you are trying to build. Napoleon Hill, in his wisdom, warned, "Choose your counselors carefully." And it is not just about selecting successful people, it is about choosing vibrational presences that are in resonance with your purpose. Because it is not someone's intelligence that guarantees good advice. It is the state of consciousness from which that advice comes. Many times we follow guidance from those who have never dared, from those who have never taken risks, from those who have never walked paths similar to ours. And we do this out of habit, out of affection, out of respect. But we forget that advice is a seed. And when you plant the wrong seeds in the soil of your soul, you reap bitter fruits, even with the best intentions. You may be stagnant not because of a lack of ability, but because of the excessive influence of misaligned voices. You may be postponing important decisions because someone with good intentions warned you about dangers you never faced. You may be giving up on a project because you listened more to the voice of someone else's fear than to the voice of your intuition. And this invisible army of poorly chosen advisors doesn't just appear when you ask. It manifests itself in subtle comments, in biased questions, in doubtful looks, in silences that weigh more than words. And if you're not careful, you'll end up living the life that others consider safe, and not the life your soul knows is possible. Spiritual awareness requires discernment. Not every voice deserves to be heard. Not every opinion is a map. Not every piece of advice is a gift. Some are anchors, others are walls. Still others are unconscious attempts to keep you small, so that others don't have to question their own stagnation. And here's the question that can redefine your path. Are the voices you're hearing today bringing you closer to or further away from who you really are? Are they strengthening your courage or feeding your fears? Are they expanding your vision or repeating the limitations you've already decided to transcend? You don't have to cut anyone out, but you do need to choose wisely who takes up space in your mind, because the energy you allow in is the same energy that will shape the decisions you make. And those decisions, repeated day after day, are what build your reality. Napoleon Hill knew it, and now you know it too. Why you feel tired. Even when you're doing everything right, there's a type of tiredness that can't be cured with rest. A burnout that doesn't come from a lack of action, but from too much misalignment. You wake up, you do your tasks, you follow the steps you've learned, you apply the recommended strategies, you do everything right, and yet you feel drained, as if something invisible and persistent is sucking your life energy, and that something often is the connections you maintain with people, environments, and patterns that no longer resonate with who you are becoming. Napoleon Hill reminds us that we are shaped by the influences we allow into our minds. And when these influences are in dissonance with our purpose, they create constant internal friction. You try to move forward, but something pulls you back. You try to rise, but you feel anchored. And this continuous effort to remain true to yourself while carrying the weight of misaligned connections creates deep wear and tear, a vibrational fatigue that cannot be resolved by taking breaks, but by realigning. This exhaustion is fueled by incorrect feedback, by advice that, although well-intentioned, does not understand the unique journey you are on, by expectations that are not yours, but that you try to meet so as not to disappoint, by environments that, instead of nourishing, drain, and, most importantly, by a disconnect between what you do and what your soul truly desires. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with motivation and pleasure, is affected not only by actions, but also by contexts. When you perform tasks that have no meaning for you, or when you seek approval from sources that do not validate your essence, your dopamine is drained, and with it, your vitality, enthusiasm, and clarity. This is why, even when you are doing everything right, you can feel exhausted, because the right thing you are doing may not be right for you. It may be right for the group, for your family, for society, but not for your soul. Recognizing this is the first step to liberation. It's not about abandoning responsibilities or commitments, but about asking, am I living in coherence with my truth? Do the people around me inspire me or limit me? Do the environments I frequent lift me up or drain me? The fatigue you feel is a signal, a call to reevaluate, realign, and if necessary, redirect. Because true energy doesn't come from what you do, but from who you are while you do it. And when you reconnect with your essence, with your purpose, and with environments that resonate with your frequency, vitality returns, not as an effort, but as a natural flow, because finally, you are at home within yourself. The structured isolation technique to reconnect to your center. At certain moments in life, the presence of others, no matter how loving, becomes noise, not because people are wrong, but because your soul is calling for silence. A silence that is not the absence of sound, but the absence of interference. An empty space where finally your own voice can emerge. It is in this place that what some call the structured isolation technique is born. Not as an escape, but as a return. Not as a withdrawal, but as a reconnection. Ancestral wisdom has always understood the importance of temporary withdrawal. Initiatory tribes isolated their young people in silent rituals before they reached maturity. Philosophers sought out nature to hear what the city muffled. Spiritual masters retreated to the desert, to the mountains, to nothingness, because they knew external noise contaminates internal clarity, and too much coexistence distances us from our own vibration. Structured isolation is not disappearance. It is a conscious choice to silence the noises long enough to listen to the soul. It is to say for a few days, today I will not respond. Today I will not participate. Today I will retreat. And in this retreat, I will not seek answers. I will seek presence. Because clarity does not come from analysis, but from stillness. And only silence allows intuition to be audible again. In this space, you begin to feel what is yours and what has been absorbed. You begin to realize that many of the anxieties you carry are not yours. They are reverberations of the collective. the group, the family. You begin to see that certain desires were not even yours. They were inherited, copied, projected, and in the void, truth is born. The mind slows down, the body breathes, the vibration adjusts, and little by little, you remember, I am presence, I am consciousness, I am energy in expansion, and everything I need is already here. When the world outside becomes quiet, this technique requires courage, because silence is frightening. The lack of stimulation is uncomfortable. Time alone reveals what you tried to ignore, but it also heals, because everything you couldn't hear amidst the noise starts to speak. Your essence speaks, your inner child speaks, your intuition speaks, and finally, you listen. After this conscious isolation, something changes. You return to the world with a different energy. Your decisions have more roots. Your no's have more firmness. Your yeses have more soul. Because now you are no longer reacting to the environment, you are responding to your own truth. Structured isolation is not a luxury. It is a necessity, a modern ritual for souls who have chosen to live awake. And if you haven't felt this call yet, it will come, and when it does, honor it. Because there, in the pause that the world doesn't understand, you will find the frequency that the world, deep down, is waiting for you to sustain. The invisible table exercise. Who's sitting in the room of your mind? There is a subtle but incredibly powerful space within each of us. An invisible room where we make decisions, evaluate possibilities, and listen to inner voices. This room is not in the physical brain. It is in the emotional realm, in the vibrational plane, in the subconscious. It is there that the silent advisors of your life sit, the voices you listen to before you act, the judgments that anticipate your choices, the presences that influence, even when absent, and the vast majority of them were placed there without your conscious permission. You carry people from your past inside this room, parents, teachers, partners, friends, maybe even people who are gone, but whose opinions remain alive. They are there, in invisible chairs, giving opinions without speaking, reacting without being present, limiting without intention. Every time you hesitate before taking a step, ask yourself, who is speaking to me right now? Is it my intuition or the voice of someone who taught me to be afraid? Is it my soul or the echo of an old criticism? Is it my desire or the repetition of advice that no longer resonates with who I am? This exercise is simple but transformative. Close your eyes and visualize a round table. See who is sitting around you. See who is taking up space in your mind, even in silence. See who still influences you even without knowing it. And then ask yourself, does this presence deserve to be here? Does this voice represent my expansion or my stagnation? Does this energy bring me closer to my truth or anchor me to my past? As you do this, you begin to clear. You begin to remove from the mental room the figures that are no longer aligned with your current vibration. And as you free these places, something magical happens. New presence come forward. New voices, more conscious, more loving, more wise, begin to manifest. Sometimes they are spiritual mentors. Sometimes they are future versions of yourself. Sometimes it is just silence. And that silence brings more clarity than 1,000 opinions. You have the right to choose who participates in your consciousness. You have the right to replace internal criticism with words of encouragement. You have the right to remove voices from the table that no longer represent you. Because the life you desire will only be possible when the room of your mind is aligned with the vibration of what you want to manifest. This is not just any visualization exercise. It is a ritual of vibrational power, a moment where you decide, with presence and intention, who you allow to remain in the most sacred part of your field, your consciousness. Because everything that manifests begins there. And if the room is occupied by shadows from the past, there will be no room for the counselors of the future. Now that the table is clean, keep it that way, with presence, with loving vigilance, because what you nurture within is what begins to flourish outside. And by taking care of this space, you take care of the quality of your own life. The real leap does not happen with a new technique, but with a new decision. And decisions only become lasting when they are born from an internal place that no longer accepts living disconnected from its own truth. At this point in the journey, perhaps something inside you is already different, not because something external has changed, but because something has been touched, revealed, acknowledged. Napoleon Hill said, "You become what you think most of the time." But what no one tells you is that the most frequent thoughts are not necessarily the most true. They are the ones most exposed to the environment. They are the thoughts fed by the voices around you, by the looks, by the vibrations that silently surround you day after day. And if the environment in which you live vibrates with fear, doubt, limitation, sooner or later, this vibration will become your predominant mental state. Tony Robbins adds a cutting reminder. Environment is stronger than will, because no matter how much you want to change, if you continue to feed emotionally on a field that denies your greatness, the field in which you live shapes your frequency, and your frequency shapes everything. The first step is not to cut people off. It is more subtle, deeper, quieter. It is to identify, with courage, who still activates your power and who only reinforces your conformity. Who sees you in essence, and who only recognizes your old version, who vibrates with you, and who drains your light. It is not about rejecting anyone. It is about stopping rejecting yourself. It is about no longer negotiating your own energy in exchange for belonging, because a life lived outside of your own vibration is a life that, sooner or later, becomes sick. The soul begins to become silent. The brightness fades from your eyes, your strength diminishes, and everything seems harder than it really is. But when you start choosing differently, everything changes. When you start to surround yourself with voices that uplift you, with environments that strengthen you, with vibrations that remind you of who you are, something reorganizes itself inside. Life begins to flow, not because it became easy, but because you stopped fighting against your own truth. And so, with this new vibrational field, you come closer to what has always been available but seemed inaccessible: peace, clarity, direction, the silent strength of someone who doesn't need to prove anything because they already know, they already feel, they already are. Now, one last question echoes. Who are you still trying to carry? Who has already stopped walking? Breathe this question. Let it find you. And if the answer comes, just listen. Because maybe, just maybe, it is this listening that will open the doors to the next level of your consciousness and the next chapter of your life.